Just give it a couple more seconds. Dang, sorry. Welcome everyone to the College of Arts workshop entitled Gender, Pronouns, Teaching and Learning, and Cultures of Respect. Just a reminder, this is a listen-only event. You may participate via the Q&A section and just type in your questions and any questions that you may have either throughout the presentation itself or at the end. And we will also be recording this event, so that people who were unable to attend this may see it at a later point, or if you wish yourself to watch it again. To start with, however, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. We are honored to recognize and to show respect for the historical and current realities of this land and its Indigenous stewards. With great respect, the College of Arts acknowledges that the University of Guelph resides on the ancestral lands of the Adirondack people and the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We uphold the significance of the dish with one spoon covenant and the continuing relationship our Indigenous neighbors have with this land. We recognize that today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Acknowledging them reminds us of our relationship to this land where we learn and work. I would just quickly like to introduce Tommy Mayberry, who very kindly agreed to give this workshop to us at a very busy time, and wanted to give you just a quick overview of Tommy's background, and then I will hand it off to Tommy in order to give the presentation. So, Tommy Mayberry, who uses pronouns he, she, they, is the manager of outreach and recruitment at St. Jerome's University at the University of Waterloo, as well as an instructional skills workshop trainer and facilitator with the ISW network. As an academic drag queen, Tommy works and researches from an embodied standpoint to explore both individually and intersectionally, gender, pedagogy, performance, language, social media, and reality TV, to name but a few, and has been the recipient of numerous awards. Tommy is co-editor of the forthcoming book, RuPaul's Pedagogies of Realness, Essays on RuPaul's Drag Race and Teaching and Learning, and has presented academic work and research across Canada and internationally. Prior to joining St. Jerome's University, Tommy was an educational developer in the Office of Teaching and Learning right here at the University of Guelph, as well as in the Center for Teaching Excellence at the University of Waterloo. Prior to that, and they are currently finishing their PhD in English language and literature at the University of Waterloo. So please join me in welcoming Tommy to this presentation, and I certainly like to again express my gratitude, Tommy, for you coming here, and very much look forward to the presentation itself.
Thank you, Rudiger, and I'm so happy to be back virtually at the University of Guelph. I'm just going to bring up my slides here and get them in presentation mode. Everyone can see those slides as well as still see me? Excellent, we're nodding. Okay, so as Rudiger said, my workshop with you folks today is Gender Pronouns, Teaching and Learning, and Cultures of Respect. Make sure my slides are working. Excellent. So I want to start off with sharing this photo of this body of water and this land here. Maybe if you might recognize that little red rectangle kind of in the middle back there as the covered bridge in Westmount Rose in southwestern Ontario. So for those of you who are familiar with the area, this is near Guelph, sort of on the Highway 86 between Elmira, Winterburn, Elora, Guelph area there. And this photo is taken on another bridge on that highway looking at the Grand River and the Westmount Rose covered bridge. And I want to share this photo and share a little bit of story about this as I acknowledge and reflect on the land that I'm currently sitting on, because the bank on the right side of this river is the Westmount Rose family trailer park, and that's where I grew up. My parents had a trailer here, and so every summer I spent here since I was born. And before the pools were opened at the trailer, we would put on our river shoes, as we called them, and our bathing suits, and we would often play right in the river of the Grand River. And so growing up, this river felt like it was mine. I had this intense connection to it for my entire life, and every time I would drive past it or go for runs or bike rides along the Grand River Trail as well, this body of water was always really special to me. And so about 5 years ago, when I started working full-time in the university, in the academy, and I started learning about the Indigenous lands and territories that we are located on, I had this kind of affective whiplash moment when I heard and started learning about where the University of Waterloo and St. Jerome's are located, because they're located on what's called the Haldimand Tract, which is land that Frederick Haldimand in 1784 promised to the Six Nations, and it includes 6 miles on either side of the Grand River. So originally in 1784, about 1 million acres was set aside on either side of the Grand River for the Haldimand Tract. Today, only about 50,000 of those acres remain Indigenous lands today, but Indigenous peoples were the contemporary the stewards of that land and continue to be the contemporary stewards of this land. And for me, when I heard that 6 miles on either side of the Grand River, I just told you that I used to play in the waters of the Grand River. So not even this kind of theoretical or, metaphorical 6 feet even on either side of it, but I grew up right on the banks of this. And so for me, part of my own learning, unlearning, and relearning has been reconciling that history of this land that I thought was mine, that I thought this river was mine, that I grew up in it and it has a special place for me, but that centuries ago was not, and was promised to people and never fully delivered to those folks to have. And so I want us, as I share this land story, I want us to keep in mind those kind of 3 principles of learning, unlearning, and relearning as we go throughout this workshop, because it's not just about learning. It's about unlearning things that we were taught specifically or even tacitly taught as well, and then relearning as we reconcile kind of that tripartite piece of it. I also want to share these two photos because I do want to acknowledge, as I start as well, that I am a white settler scholar living and working at the university, or at St. Jerome's University at the University of Waterloo. And I also identify as a queer and trans feminine person as well. And so maybe you've seen these photos or you've heard these names of Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera before. So I want to share a little bit as I talk about my white body in the academy and how I find myself as an intersectional white person who's also queer and trans, thinking about the Stonewall riot and thinking about how on June 28th, 1969, the police raided the Stonewall Inn, which is a gay bar and recreational tavern in Greenwich Village in New York. And Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera on the slide here, two trans women of color who also were drag queens, who were LGBTQ plus activists and heroines in the community. They were fed up and they had enough of these raids, and they threw the first brick, which was allegedly Johnson, and the first bottle, which was allegedly Rivera, at the raiding police. And this ignited what now is known as the Stonewall riots, and it ushered in a revolution that we now commemorate and celebrate each June as Pride Month. So in some respects, we've come a long way. Thinking about, Pride Month is now something where we have pride parades and we're celebrating, this history. But in other regards, we still have a lot of work to do. So when we think about language, something I want to share, not only about my white body, as I acknowledge who I am and where I situate myself in this work, but also thinking about the revolution that happened in 1969, and when these two trans women and drag queens of color marched on the precinct the morning after the brick and the bottle were thrown. That wasn't a parade, that was a march. And so thinking about the difference between a march and a parade and how we now celebrate with pride parades instead of marches, those are incredibly different types of mobilization and energy and passion in those. So language is incredibly powerful and important, and that's actually what we're here to talk about today, is language in gender pronouns, teaching and learning, and cultures of respect. So for this workshop, our outcomes are that by the end of this workshop, you should be able to define and discuss pronouns, including gender pronouns, as parts of speech and English language discourse, history, and culture with a knowledgeable, inclusive, and respectful vocabulary. We should also be able to identify and implement strategies and resources for positive engagement with gender pronouns in teaching and learning, as well as use pronoun awareness to signal cultures of respect and reflect on whiteness, marginalization, trauma, and continued struggle. I do want to draw attention to this asterisk here that I added into one of the outcomes by the word English. This workshop absolutely is focused around English language, since Guelph is a predominantly English-speaking institute. The College of Arts does have the School of Languages and Literatures as well. So I do want to invite you to chat about pronouns and gender-inclusive communication in more languages than just English. But the focus of this workshop is on the English language as we think about pronouns and gender inclusive communication. But I invite those other conversations and questions as well. I'm not so much of an expert in other languages outside of English than I am with this one, but I have learned some things and I'm able to share stuff as well. So please don't feel you can't ask questions about wider languages than English as well. So we are going to start right at what is a pronoun. And Dean Spade, who is a associate professor at Seattle University School of Law and identifies as a trans activist, writer, and teacher, notes that it is a somewhat obscure grammar term after all. But at their core, a pronoun is a part of speech that replaces a noun, and a noun, we might remember, is a person, place, thing, idea, or emotion. And so a pronoun as a part of speech replaces a noun to stand in for that noun in discourse and communication. So we have this handy table, which you've maybe seen before. You maybe remember this from grade school grammar lessons. You maybe remember this from some of your additional language training and classrooms where you're looking at pronoun tables and you're conjugating verbs as well. But we have them in these different cases. So subject pronouns would be he, she, they, it. The object form of those pronouns would be him, her, them, and it. And we have possessive forms of those pronouns. So his, her or hers, their or theirs, and its. So when we think about what is a gender pronoun then, well, when a pronoun replaces and stands in for a noun who is a person, because remember, nouns can be a person, place, thing, idea, or emotion. So person, when we're replacing a noun who is a person, we're grammatically responsible for aligning the pronoun standing in with that person's gender. And our language itself does dictate this. So I'm going to take us back to, again, the 1700s in 1762 with Robert Loth's A Short Introduction to English Grammar with Critical Notes, where he defines pronoun as, quote, a word standing instead of a noun, as its substitute or representative, and in the pronoun are to be considered the person, number, gender, and case, end quote. And there's a reason why I want to use Robert Loth here with the Short Introduction to English Grammar, because you might be thinking, wow, we're usually told to be using contemporary resources in our research, 5 or 10 years max for that. And 1762 is many more years than, 2010 at max, or 2011 for that. But in the 1700s, the mid to late 1700s and the early 1800s was when a lot of shifts were happening in cultural identity and cultural understanding within the British Empire. So there are those colonial aspects coming out of that, where Robert Loth, who was a bishop of the Anglican Church, was creating this document, the Short Introduction to English Grammar, to tidy up language so that it could be used as a tool to be taught to other people in the colonies as well. And so there is a sinister piece to this as well, where we think about colonization and we think about language and rules and grammar, not just in a way to teach, but in a way to colonize and transform as well. And so Robert Loth, I do want to add as well, you maybe haven't heard his name before, but you've probably heard the other grammar rule that you can never end a sentence with a preposition. Robert Loth is the one who invented that in 1762 and put into this English grammar manual. So nowhere before that were we ever told you can't end a sentence with a preposition. So thinking about how language evolves and changes, I want us to look at this, because in 1762, when language was being sort of colonized and used in that way, Robert Loth put forward that we have to consider 4 things in a pronoun: the person, the number, the gender, and the case. So when we bring up this table again, and we're thinking about the subject, object, and possessive forms of the pronouns, something should stand out to us as a little bit off here. And that would be that bottom row of pronouns, the it, and its. Because we should not use it when we're replacing a person, or when we're using a pronoun to stand in for a noun who is a person, we should not use it. Why? It is very dehumanizing in removing not only the gender altogether of the person, but any sense and semblance of humanity. And so this is the same thing that actually happens when people mispronoun or misgender someone. Of course, intentionality can drastically augment this, but the human person still feels those wrong pronouns and that invalidation of them when we would use a different pronoun for them that's not their lived pronoun. So thinking about it in political terms and humanist terms as well, we wouldn't use it to refer to a person. You'll see the other little note there, never lead with it. And the reason why I want to add that is that if somebody tells you that their pronoun is it, they're asking you to refer to them with that pronoun. So don't lead with it. Never assume that someone's pronoun would be it, or never use that to replace their name as a person. However, it may not be so uncommon as to say never use it to refer to a person as well, because one of the platinum rules that we're going to chat about today is however someone asks you or tells you to refer to them, that's how you do it. So if someone's pronoun series are it, you would use that to refer to them, but you wouldn't make the decision to do that to a person. So I just want to reiterate, because this will guide our next part of the discussions as well, that Robert Loth talked about person, number, gender, and case as well. So thinking about number, that gets us into this other, question that we're often asked, which is, isn't they plural? Or sometimes it's not even a question, it's actually just a statement of fact, they is plural. And you'll hear folks say, I can't use they to refer to a single person because they is plural. So here's a quotation from Jen Mannion, who's an associate professor of history at Amherst College and who identifies as a female-bodied, masculine-presenting person. So Jen says, I argue endless battles with well-educated people who think their own grammar school lessons from 40 or 50 years ago preclude them from referring to individual students as they. So this is what I'm talking about with the learning, unlearning, and relearning, is that Jen's pointing out here that well-educated people 40 or 50 years ago were taught that they is only plural and can't be singular. And that they hold on to that and say, well, I was taught this, so it must be right. But part of our project is also unlearning some of those pieces that we were taught and relearning them in a different way to be more inclusive and more respectful, anti-racist, decolonial, across that gamut of equity and inclusivity as well. So Spade says this year, which was 2018 when he was writing, my students are working to advocate that our writing faculty stop teaching that the singular pronoun they, them is grammatically incorrect. A battle we still have to fight, even though the mainstream press has recognized this use. So here's Spade saying specifically that stop teaching this, right? If we can stop teaching it, we don't have to then have a generation that will need to unlearn the teaching of the singular pronoun not grammatically being correct for they, them. And when Spade talks about the mainstream press recognizing its use, in 2015, a bunch of lexicographers, English professors, PhD holders, people involved in every part of language as experts got together and decided that they, as a singular non-binary pronoun, would be the word of the year. So 6 years ago now, they, as a singular non-binary pronoun, was recognized as the word of the year. This is part of that mainstream press piece. So then people say, okay, but isn't they plural in academic and professional writing cultures? So sure, they're thinking, okay, I get it, they can be plural, but surely it can't be in the academy. It can't be in professional writing cultures. And they were right until very recently. So again, keep in mind that in 2015, they as a singular non-binary pronoun was word of the year. In 2017, 2 years later, the Chicago Manual Style, or CSM, updated to include they as a generic third-person singular pronoun to refer to a person whose gender is unknown or irrelevant to the context. 2 more years later, in 2019, Merriam-Webster's dictionary updated to include they as a singular indefinite pronoun used to refer to an unknown or unspecified person, to a single person whose gender is intentionally not revealed, and or to a single person whose gender identity is non-binary. So Merriam-Webster's took it even further and added those 3 pieces to how they can be a singular pronoun. And in 2020, in the very early months pre-pandemic, the American Psychological Association, APA, and the Modern Language Association, MLA, also updated to follow suit. A really exciting and interesting piece of MLA's update is that they included the word themselves as the reflexive pronoun for the singular non-binary pronoun they, them. And this is super important for a couple reasons. One, it shows how language can change with words being created to, continue tidying up our language, but in an inclusive instead of colonial way. So if you were typing in Microsoft Word and you were using the singular they, it is going to autocorrect themselves to themselves, because the reflexive pronoun would still be plural. We would use it in a singular way, but MLA says, you know what, let's just create the word themselves and use that for the singular person. The second part of why this is so brilliant and important is this brings to attention another part of our English language that has always been doing this singular plural in and of itself, where context helped us to understand the difference from it. And that would be with the second person you. So in English, the second person pronouns you, when you would conjugate a verb, let's use the verb to be here, you would always say you are. You would never say you is. However, we know that the second person pronoun you in English can refer to an individual person or to a group of people, and context would tell us which it is. So if I were to say you are drinking your bottle of water, and if I'm sort of gesturing at Rudiger, we would know that I'm talking to Rudiger, you're drinking your bottle of water. If I were to say you're drinking your bottles of water, and I did kind of a gesture to the room, you would understand that multiple people are drinking their bottles of water. We have 2 different reflexive pronouns for that. We have yourself and yourselves that also indicate the differences between that in English. We did not have the themself until the MLA added that just over a year ago to it. So this not only keeps our language being updated in an inclusive way, but it also showed how we already have the cognitive abilities to do exactly what we're saying we're doing with the singular non-binary they pronoun. And so when people say, but it's so hard to do that, I wasn't, my mind doesn't work that way. You're one person. How could I refer to you by conjugating the verb to be as are? Well, we already do it in the second person, so it shouldn't be that hard to unlearn, there it is again, and relearn how to use this. All of this together, then, thinking about these manuals of style and these ways that govern our language, because of course, in a teaching and learning context in the university, if we are students who are writing a paper who a prof is going to be grading, or we're profs grading our students' paper, we're using the APA, the MLA, the CSM style to make sure that they're understanding the academic context of that. So we can also update our own local style and brand guides to knock out, for example, Latinate gender suffixes like alumnus. Alumnus is gendered. Even though the university uses it to mean anyone who graduated from our university, that US ending is still a masculine form. When I was at Guelph, coming up will be at St. Jerome's for a year in 5 days. So just over a year ago when I was still at Guelph, I was part of a project with Guelph's communication department high up where we were working on this. So I don't know what the state of that currently is, but Guelph was leading a charge as well to update Guelph's own style guides to knock out some of these genderful statements as well. So I don't know where they are, but if you're interested, you could follow up with some of those folks as well and see where that work is going. So then people say to me, fine, okay, but the singular they is at least new, right? And then that desperate, right? Like they're holding on to this idea that it must be some social justice, post-millennial kind of thing that we're making the singular they happen. No, it's remarkable that it took until 2015 when they was the word of the year and beyond for academic cultures for this pronoun to gain the considerable traction that it has, since as early as our Middle English of the 1300s, so 4 centuries before the 1700s when I was locating some of these document pieces, our language has actually had it in its employ. So here's the Wycliffe Bible from 1382 for an instance where it says, quote, each one in their craft is wise. So each individual person in their craft is wise. So not each one in his/her craft is wise, and definitely not each one in his craft is wise. It's not defaulting to a singular male to be the universal. Each one in their craft is wise. And what's super cool about this quotation, you'll notice there, that word, as I'm reading it, I do not know how to pronounce this in the Middle English, but that letter that looks like a lowercase b and p together is called a thorn, and it's pronounced as a th sound. So it's not a mistake. That was not a, oh, that should have been an H or something as well. That's absolutely an early version of there. And so this, of course, is super interesting because this is Middle English, not modern English or not contemporary English. But let's go back to the 1700s, where all of this cultural identity shifts are being played with, but also being solidified in these documents, to another colonial document, Oliver Goldsmith's The History of England, where he writes, quote, every person who had been punished for seditious libels during the foregoing administration now recovered their liberty, and had damages given to them upon those who had decreed their punishment, end quote. So here's 1771 in the history of England, that ultimate colonizing British Empire force that is going out and creating these colonial states in the United States, what will become Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and every person, again, every individual person, singular. And then Goldsmith 3 times uses the pronoun they, them, there, in the singular sense here. Again, super important. This historical document, 1771, did not use or default to a singular he to be that universal every person. It included them there as well. I want to pause here for a moment, and this is a picture of Sam actually sitting in my chair looking at the screen that I'm looking at, and this is my quick little break to say, what can I clarify? We've gone through a lot of language pieces, we've gone through centuries of language as well, and before I take it to add on specific gender contemporary pieces, I want to check in and see how we're doing, if we have anything I can clarify about the language pieces specifically. And so we've opened up the live Q&A there. So I am going to awkwardly be quiet for probably 30 seconds so you can type and think. And then we'll have a little bit of a chat about language before we add gender on top of it. In in-person, face-to-face facilitation of workshops, I can usually read body language better than I can, looking at that little green dot and trying to see what's happening. So I usually make some kind of joke here where I say, okay, so if I were to give you a grammar test right now on pronouns, who's going to ace it? And then almost immediately somebody's hand goes up because they're like, oh no, I would not ace it. So I'm going to continue, but I'm going to keep an eye on the live Q&A there in case any language questions come up. This is not your last chance to ask language questions. So if, as we start to layer gender on top of this and it gets a little more complicated, if you're feeling like, oh shoot, I misremember what Tommy said, or I'm wondering about that, please do jot a question there, and I'll keep an eye on that to see if we need to sort of circle back on any of the language questions as well. But I am going to move forward and put some contemporary gender pieces on top of this as well. So stay with me, but also do not feel embarrassed or anything if you're like, I really should have asked a question about language when Tommy gave me the chance. We still have plenty of time. And again, in a in-person environment, I'd be able to see if everyone's looking really uncomfortable and then maybe try to pull a little bit more out of you. But I cannot see you, unfortunately. So thinking about what are gender pronouns that people use, with this understanding of pronouns in English language going forward, we actually then can think about when we're talking about people's personal pronouns and gender pronouns, it can be helpful to think of them in series as well as cases. So that pronoun table before had cases, but thinking about all these interconnected ways, we actually can think of them quite easily in series. So I've added a column here to the left for the series then. So the he series would be he, him, his. The she series would be she, her, or hers. The they series would be they, them, their, or theirs. You could have the Z series, which would be Z, here, here's, or the V series, which would be V, them, ver. You also could have what I call the just my name series, where you wouldn't replace the person's name with a pronoun. You would use the person's name as the subject pronoun. You would use the person's name as the object pronoun, and you'd use the person's name plus apostrophe S for the possessive pronoun. I do want to note that this table is neither exhaustive nor complete. As I had mentioned around the pronoun it earlier, it is possible, and it is very likely. I've been corrected a couple times in some of this work. I used to say never use the pronoun it to refer to a person, and some people have told me that a friend of theirs, or they had read a recent blog post, that some people are identifying with the pronoun it because that's how they understand their gendered identity in their body. So there are always going to be, and this is important, there are always going to be shifts in evolution in language, because when it comes to gender pronouns and how we understand ourselves, we are individual people who walk in our own bodies and exist in this world as individual people in bodies. And maybe a series of pronouns like the Z or the V series don't fit someone. Maybe a different series does. Maybe a combination of series does. So it's not exhaustive and it's not complete at all. A couple notes here that I want to just kind of double or triple down on. Some people use gender pronoun or gender neutral pronoun series that might be unfamiliar, such as the Z and the V series. So again, going to our platinum rule, however someone asks or tells you to refer to them, that's how you do it. So if someone says, oh, my pronouns are the Z series, and they say Z here, here's, that might be quite difficult for you in your head to begin to use without having to translate or without having to think, okay, what did Tommy say about object pronoun versus possessive pronoun? How do I use it here? That means you also probably will make a mistake or several mistakes. I make mistakes plenty of times when I'm meeting new people and I'm working with them or I'm getting to know who they are, because we make assumptions based on how we visually present as bodies in the world. And those assumptions come from a very binary colonial understanding of gender, where we have the he series and the she series and quote unquote, that's it. As I just spent the first half hour chatting about, there is considerable history, but also debate around the they series to even be able to be singular. So it can be tricky for us to think in our head, okay, how do I do this? So if you make a mistake, you apologize, you correct, so you use the right pronoun, and then you move on. You don't dwell on it. You don't make it about you. You don't profusely apologize because you're trying so hard and you want to be, you know, socially woke and everything. Nope. The way that you would do it if you made any other mistake reading from your notes, you'd say, excuse me, they are, and you move on. Those do become tricky again if it is the Z or the V series, because you might not know what the other ones are, and you may have to ask then how to use that. I do always want to share at this point as well, if somebody does correct you, that's because they care about you. And they care about you as a person, and they value who you are in their life. So if they're saying, oh, my pronouns are V, them, and then you say, okay, how do I use that? And then you make a mistake and they correct you, they're not writing you off. So it can often feel very reflexive and very defensive on our part when someone corrects us and corrects our language. But if they're correcting us, it's because they care about us. If they don't care about us, they're going to write us off and just be like, never engaging with that person again. So be respectful back when somebody is saying, oh, I use this. Some people's pronominal system is also just their name and not a series of pronoun. So pronominal is an adjective. So if you thought we were done when we were talking about verbs, nouns, and pronouns, here's another part of speech, adjective. Adjectives are things that describe or modify a noun. And so pronominal means relating to and or serving as a pronoun. And so some people's pronominal system is just their name and not a series of pronouns. And this is because there are plenty of people who don't use pronouns at all. So you wouldn't replace their name with a pronoun, and you wouldn't say, my pronouns are just my name. You would say, well, I mean, maybe you wouldn't say pronominal system, but instead of using pronouns, you would use their name. So that would sound like, Tommy put Tommy's water bottle down on the table so Tommy could take a drink when Tommy was thirsty. It's not up to a listener to tell that Tommy, that sounds annoying, that sounds cumbersome, just use a pronoun, it makes it easier. For many reasons, somebody could not use a pronoun series, but have a pronominal system that's their name. And one of the most important ones that we need to talk about is the intersexualized community. So intersex bodies and the intersexualized communities, those are people who, when they're born, Western medical science can't look between their legs and easily tell based on anatomy and genitalia which binary gender this baby would be. So what often happens before birth in early ultrasounds that can tell or that can see anatomy, or shortly after the moment of birth, many more medical professionals are brought in and many consultations and decisions are made without that person's consent or participation in surgeries that are about to happen, hormone replacements, therapies, those sort of things that will happen, because this baby who has what is largely termed ambiguous genitalia, which is, there's a whole other slew of problems with that language from Western medicine, but that baby doesn't fit neatly into the binary of male or female. And so surgeries are performed on this baby to correct their body and cast them into one of the binary bodies or the other. And so many intersexualized people will not use a series of pronouns. They won't even use the they series of pronouns for themselves individually, because all of the language is so steeped in gender and colonial history that their name is who they are. So don't replace their name, is what they're saying. My name is everything I have about my identity. So even if it sounds cumbersome to say, Tommy, 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 that's who I am, and no other part of speech can replace that. Other folks as well, similarly, may just not subscribe to colonial language systems and say, you know what, my name is my name, you can use that. Pronominal system is another way to think about this as well. And then some people use and are open to being referred to by more than one series of pronouns. So me, for example, as Rudiger introduced at the beginning, my pronouns are he, she, and they. And I often say you can use any of those series to respectfully refer to me, or to refer to me respectfully. And that respect piece is super important, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share with you a quick sort of anecdote, or several interrelated anecdotes about myself and how I came to understand who I am as a queer person, as a trans person, and someone in this, at times gender ambiguous body as a drag queen, and where I came to understand that these three series are the ones that I use. So I was assigned male at birth. Or as I like to accurately say, I was actually assigned male before I was born. Our family doctor let slip in an early ultrasound with my parents, masculine sounding vocabulary, and my parents' ears, of course, peaked up, and they were like, oh, that sounds male. And so out of my three siblings, my older sister, my two younger brothers, I'm the only one who was named before I was born. And so actually before I was even born, my parents named me Tommy. On my birth certificate, my name is Thomas, but no one calls me Thomas, except one prof from my undergrad who still will call me Thomas. But I was little Tommy before I was even born, because of that early ultrasound and that look at my anatomy. I do often, especially in this COVID virtual work from home mode where I'm not usually seen by people, I do visually present most often in a culturally coded binary male way. So facial hair, clothes from the binary male section of the store, very much looking like that headshot in the middle here. I also have a same-sex partner whose name is also Tommy, and we appear in the world on Facebook, social media around as a gay male couple, often affectionately referred to as the Tommies, or sometimes Tommy 1 and Tommy 2, and we're always suspicious who is Tommy 2 in those situations. But all of that for who I am as a person, I grew up, as I said, before I was even born, with male pronouns being applied to refer to who I was, and that was, at this point, it still is over half my life, but at some point it won't be over half my life. That was the only series of pronouns that was used for me. And what happened when I got to high school, and high school was not a great experience for me in a lot of ways, but what happened when I got to high school was the she series of pronouns actually got applied to me in a very disrespectful, antagonistic, bullying way because of my femininity, because of my, the cadence of my voice, or the gestures of my body, or the way that I walked. I used to understand, and this was a very recent realization for me in doing my academic work, but I used to understand, and my parents still talk about it, that I was bullied for being gay, is the kind of narrative that my parents understand, and that for the longest time I understood as well. But when I look back on it, and when I reflect and think through who I am and how I came to be the person that I am, I wasn't bullied for being attracted to the same sex. I was bullied because of all the feminine characteristics that didn't fit into my binary culture-coded male body. And that word she was used to refer to me in a very violent way. And so when I found drag in my first master's degree, and when I started to explore who I could be as a person, the very first time that I looked in the mirror and saw my face in full drag, I was all ready to name who this character was going to be and build her backstory and everything. But when I looked in the mirror, I recognized myself. The person who I saw looking back at me was me. It was someone who I had seen before in my life, but I never remembered or realized who it was. And that's why I include that photo on the far left of this little boy in a curly wig with a smock on and makeup. Because this photo, again, a recent find, my grandmother passed away in January 2020, before the pandemic. And so we were able to go as a full family to the funeral home, and we were building the photo boards of all of the old family photos. And one of my cousins found this photo and brought it over to me and was like, this photo says it's you. And so I asked my mom, what did I want to be for Halloween? Because this was Halloween. And my mom says, oh my gosh, I completely forgot about this. You asked me to be just a lady. that was my Halloween costume this year when I was 7 years old. And so I do want to note, this is my mom's interpretation of Just a Lady, not mine. This was my mom who put me in drag for the first time as Just a Lady. But we then found a bunch of other photos throughout the years of me in Halloween, wanting to be the Pink Power Ranger, wanting to be Britney Spears. There was a Posh Spice one that was quite fierce. And so that first time when I knew consciously I was doing drag, that wasn't my first time. And so I had seen, when I was growing up in my preteen years, I had seen those reflections of me in the mirror in makeup and wigs and female coded clothing. And so it shouldn't have been a surprise that I recognized who I was, because I had seen her before. And that was a really powerful moment for me, because I realized that the way people in high school were bullying me using the she series of pronouns is something now that I could powerfully apply to my body, and something I could take back, because in drag, not only spending 3 hours putting my makeup on, contouring, taping, tucking, corseting, wigs, everything, not only do I feel like that is the moment when you should refer to me with the she series of pronouns, but that's a powerful political statement of who I am, taking back language that was used to basically tell me I shouldn't have existed. And so that moment for me, that first conscious looking in the mirror, shifted all of my research and work, and it became about being an academic drag queen, somebody who is trying to elevate the academy to the level of drag in clubs and cultures where the social studies of that is way more advanced than a lot of the work that we have going in academia. And so when we think about the LGBTQIA2S plus banner, I see myself and I understand myself in the G, the T, and the Q. So as I said, I identify as a queer and trans person, but as you'll see on this slide as well, with my partner Tommy, we do appear as a gay male couple. So those 3 letters are who I am, and I always have my nails done. Well, except in COVID, I don't always have my hair necessarily on fleek. And I did, though, put on some makeup today, because I'm going to be sitting in bright lights with you folks on camera. So in or out of drag, I'm always playing around with my identity and how I visually present. And I do like to think about myself as a flamboyant person and a fierce person. When I started publishing and editors and journals were asking for third-person biographies, I actually had another moment in my understanding of my identity where I couldn't figure out how to represent who I am as a whole person, because if I only used the he series of pronouns, I felt like an entire part of who I was in that bio was missing. And same thing if I only use the she series of pronouns. And so I played around then thinking, do I do he/she? Do I switch them? First instance he, second instance she. And then I used the they, and the they felt right. It felt like it was who I am as a person in a third person context. So when I say my pronouns are he, she, and they, you can use any of those to refer to me respectfully, I mean that. You're not misgendering me if you use the he series or the she series or the they series, if you use them with respect. Because as I said, the she series has been used against me in a very disrespectful way. And actually one time on social media as well, the he series was used against me in a very derogatory way as well. So with respect is very important. And then understanding how folks come to learn about themselves and arrive is a lifelong journey. I just shared with you from months before I was born to when I started publishing. And so I'm not confident enough to say that for the rest of my life, these will be the 3 pronouns that you can use to refer to me, because I'm not done growing. I'm not done learning, unlearning, and relearning. That's a lifelong process. And so in this moment, this is who I am, and this is how you can refer to me. One last caveat before I open it back up for questions. One last caveat is what I just shared with you, this story, this history, this kind of academic connecting of these pieces together is something that I often do in my work as a way to create a safer space and to invite people in to ask questions they maybe would feel really unsafe asking or really vulnerable asking. This sharing of identity is not something that every queer and trans person will be comfortable doing. And it's definitely not something that you can expect every queer and or trans person to do to help you on your learning, unlearning, and relearning journey. So don't think that, oh, Tommy's a drag queen and Tommy shared this whole history of trauma and growth, and I can ask any drag queen that. You can't. What you can do, I will suggest, is you can ask if you can ask. That kind of meta displacement of it, where you can say, oh, can I ask you about your drag character, your drag history? Can I ask you about your pronoun series? Can I ask you about this? And be ready for the answer to be no. If the answer is yes, still tread cautiously. That's not a completely open door to be like, you know, tell me about when you were sexed at birth, kind of thing. But be ready for someone to say no, because it is not their job to teach you. You know, as Rudiger said, I was invited here to do this workshop. It is my job to teach you in that sense. And this is part of who I am as an artist, as a researcher, as a teacher, as an academic drag queen, is this teaching. So when I say, as I'm about to say right now, what can I clarify about myself? And what questions do you have that I can help you understand from my perspective and my lived experience as a queer and trans person? That's something I'm choosing to do today from a very empowered position, not something that is a kind of carte blanche you can ask any queer and trans person. So I will pause again to let you type questions. I see a question. I missed it. I'm so sorry. Danielle told me I was supposed to click publish, not new. So there is one in publish. But I'm going to be quiet for 30 seconds and I'm going to see what questions you have at this point before we take everything and apply it specifically to teaching and learning contexts. So what can I clarify about anything we've talked about so far, including my own lived experience and my own history of learning, unlearning, and relearning with who I am? I also am aware now that I'm actually paying attention to what Danielle and Rudiger had said, that when you type questions in, they go to Danielle first and Danielle has to click publish and then I can see them. So there might be even a bit more of a delay in that. I apologize. But a question did come in about the grammar pieces. And the question is, just as we talked about the history of they, have the Z and V series been historically integrated into the English language, or are they relatively new? And this is a really exciting question, actually, because one, I don't know. I don't know the history of those completely. I guess 1B would be, no one has yet done a complete etymological study on those. There seem to be various locations of parts of them. So the V series has shown up in, I think, 1990s anime and manga. In those English translations, there's been a V series of pronouns used. Someone once shared that with me, so I don't know. That was not a research discovery that I found. Someone shared that with me when a similar question was asked in one of these workshops. And the Z series, the here is also, so Z here, hears, the here, HIR, is also a Middle English and Old English pronoun that was used similarly to one. So the way in English we would say, you know, as one might say, and you're kind of referring in a very formal way to a singular non-binary unknown individual, kind of like the royal we, but not plural. HIR is a Middle English pronoun that had similar kind of instances with it. So the Z is not part of that Middle English history, at least not to my knowledge, but the here is. And so there, in some of the research, when you look at the history of neo-pronouns, you'll see kind of crossings of where some of them come from and where they're kind of going for that. But so sorry, to actually answer the question, or are they relatively new? Yes, and they're relatively new. There's not been, at least to my knowledge, there hasn't been a comprehensive study on these ones yet. So I realize that's not a great answer, but as I said, it's an exciting question, and there's work and research to be done in there as well that one day I hope to do more of, but just as of yet have not. So thank you for that question. What other questions at this point? Okay, well, I now have my Q&A on published, so I will see them if they pop up there, and I will pause to go to them. But taking this to teaching and learning, so thinking about gender pronouns in teaching and learning and how we can foster inclusivity in teaching and learning, I want to share with you kind of two key ways that we can do this, that we can foster inclusivity in our teaching and learning work and efforts with gender pronouns. And the first would be creating and maintaining an inviting place around us as teachers. The second would be modeling. And again, I'm so sorry, but if we were in a live environment together face to face, I would make a embodied pun about modeling. And I'm not talking about drag queen runway modeling here. I'm talking about the way that we as teachers can model using pronouns. And so with both of these, with creating and maintaining an inviting place around us as teachers and with modeling, we need to be intentional and meaningful when it comes to this. This can't be something, what I'm about to share with you, can't be something you just do spur of the moment. Oh yeah, Tommy said I should do this, so I'm going to try it in this class. Or, oh yeah, we can do that. That's great. And, just kind of have it be not super meaningful for it. We'll talk about the stakes involved in this as we go through as well. But intention is super important. Meaningfulness is important around it. And then I do want to say as we go through this, transparency is important in this as well, and vulnerability. Bell Hooks, a critical pedagogy scholar and also an English literature scholar, her PhD was in English Lit. She talked about vulnerability in teaching and how us as teachers, if we can't be vulnerable in front of and with our students, how and why do we expect that they'll be vulnerable back with us in these spaces? So transparency, intentionality, and meaningfulness as well. So I want to share with you two quotations by two really important, hugely influential American writers and intersectional feminists as well. And the first is from Adrienne Rich from her 1986 essay, Invisibility in Academine. And she says, quote, "When someone with the authority of a teacher describes the world and you are not in it, there is a moment of psychic disequilibrium, as if you looked into a mirror and saw nothing. Yet you know you exist and others like you. That this is a game with mirrors. It takes some strength of soul, and not just individual strength, but collective understanding, to resist this void, this non-being into which you are thrust, and to stand up demanding to be seen and heard," end quote. And Toni Morrison says, quote, "I tell my students," quote within a quote, "I tell my students, when you get these jobs that you've been so brilliantly trained for, just remember that your real job is that if you are free, you need to free somebody else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else. This is not just a grab bag candy game," end quote. And what I love about these two quotations, both of them are teaching and learning quotations. They're thinking about the training and the classroom and teacher and student dynamics and post-graduation dynamics as well. But they're also both talking about, as you'll see I've bolded in green, game. And both of them talk about this idea of it being a game or not just being a game. And for me, this is not, I do need to put an asterisk and caveat here, this is not gamification in teaching and learning as some kind of new strategy. This is thinking about gaslighting and gaming and the way that colonial systems oppress and keep bodies oppressed and keep denying equity to bodies as well. So when Rich talks about a game with mirrors, it's this idea of a teacher holding up a mirror, and by not making sure that you are represented in that mirror of the way they're describing the world or their curriculum or the text that they assign on their syllabus, if you don't see yourself in this mirror, Adrienne Rich is saying, it's like you don't even exist. And then the pressure is put on those of us, those students, those equity denied groups of people, to have to throw themselves into a very risk-full environment by saying, actually, I'm here, I exist, I live, I breathe, and to demand to be seen and heard. And then when Morrison's talking about this grab bag candy game, we're thinking about those things where we can differently empower people based on our goals with teaching and learning as well. And so if we're not making sure that everybody is able to be empowered and that we can use the power we got from the brilliant training in our undergrad degrees and our graduate degrees in any of our professional degrees that we have, then we're not doing our job the way we're supposed to be doing for that. Because again, the game is one in the colonial structure that rewards people who already have power. It doesn't reward people who don't have power. And so thinking about the game and the way that we as teachers can create and maintain an inviting place around us is to transparently acknowledge that game, to talk about the goals of teaching and learning, what we're doing, how we're representing people so they can see themselves in the mirrors, and how we are empowering as we go through as well. And this is super important when we think about, especially the day after the International Day of Transvisibility, thinking about in Canada and in other OECD countries or Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development countries, a study they did in 2019 reveals some really harrowing statistics when it comes to queer and trans bodies. They noted in their 2019 study that nearly 1 in 3 individuals identifying as LGBTQIA2S+ report experiencing discrimination. This is the Partner Live workshop where I would do one of those, look to your left, look to your right. One of the 3 of you will be discriminated against for being who you are. The report also notes that social acceptance of sexual and gender minorities by Canadian citizens is approximately half the population surveyed. This is another harrowing statistic of half because we did a really, really, really good job, ironically, during the past 4 years of the Trump administration of looking across the border and saying, at least we're not the States. And what happened twice was this approximately half the population split in the 2 elections that Trump was running in, where we saw half the population does not accept minorities. That's true in Canada. We are not better than the States. That is a myth that we tell ourselves when it comes to social acceptance. And then this one really, really breaks my heart, especially on the day after the International Day of Transvisibility. 44% of respondents said that they would accept a child who expressed themselves differently from the sex which they were assigned at birth. So 44% would accept, which means 56% would reject their own child who identified or expressed themselves differently than the binary sex they were assigned at birth. That's huge. To think about Canadian systems and to think about other OECD countries where over half the population would reject their own child who is different from the binary sex doctors assign them at birth is heartbreaking and is horrifying. And so when we bring this back to our teaching and learning context, and when we think about who our students are, who our teachers are, who across the academy is representing or represented in these classrooms, we need to think about that ultimate piece of this oppression and of this rejection. Spade again notes that being called by what you go by, rather than being misgendered and misnamed, can reduce anxiety, reduce depression, and reduce suicidality. Those are huge goals that universities need to have for their students because we don't talk enough about the way that universities and the academy are colonizing systems that are lethal. We have a system that kills our students, that kills our equity denied groups because of these increases in anxiety and depression and suicidality. And as Spade's saying, if something as simple but huge as being referred to by what you go by can reduce those, we need to be doing that. So how do we begin doing this? How do we begin maintaining and creating those spaces? Well, again, we can model our own pronouns and our own pronominal systems, and we can transparently invite others to do so as well. So I'm going to take you through a few visual examples. There's a note that's going to come through on the end that I've animated this slide to have them each pop up. So they're going to overlap with each other. So each of them are on their own slide at the end of the PDF as well. Email signatures are a great way where we as teachers can share our identities, our pronouns. So I've often been told that my email signatures are huge. And they are. This is a big picture with my email signature, but you'll notice under the St. Jerome's logo and under the address, it says pronouns, he, she, they, and that word pronoun is hyperlinked. So that hyperlink actually takes you to a teaching tip that I wrote on gender pronouns in teaching that explains, that teaching tip actually was the once upon a time what started all of this work with of the talk that I'm doing with you folks today. And there's the reason why I hyperlinked it was people may not know what that means when they see pronouns : he, she, they. And so they can click pronouns and they can learn a little bit about it to do their own learning, unlearning, and relearning as well. And so here's a way that I can signal who I am, how to be respectfully referred to, but also anyone reading my emails can see that, and they can see perhaps, thinking about Adrienne Rich's mirror, they might see themselves in that as well. So in the digital world, of course, with Zoom, not so easy as Teams, because Teams pulls our data from the university system and creates the profile. But on Zoom, for example, you could put your pronouns in the last name box, and you could put your full name in the first name box. So on Zoom, it would show up as first name, last name, and then pronouns. It would be wonderful if one day they added a box that said pronouns, so they were normalizing and boosting that process, but we can kind of hack that system a bit there. Bitmojis are also another wonderful way to, in a fun, contemporary way in the digital world, share pronouns. Unfortunately, the Bitmoji app doesn't let you do more than one series of pronouns, so you'll notice I had to do 4 in order to get all of my pronouns with my respective avatars there on it. What I like about this is if you are someone who's teaching, or if you're a student in a class and you don't need to have your camera on, or you don't want to have your camera on, or whatever the circumstances would be, you could have this as your profile picture so that your little Bitmoji avatar is showing up and your pronouns are there so that you're signaling that, but also it's a way that you can be respectfully referred to. Social media is another great way to do this. There was a lot of exciting conversation around when Biden and Harris got in that Kamala Harris had her pronouns in her Twitter profile as well. So this kind of, one of the highest offices in the world, and the incumbent had their pronouns located there. So social media is another frontward facing way. In the real world, the physical world, business cards are often another first point of contact. And so adding pronouns to business cards can be a great way, especially if you're leaving a stack of them at a booth or something as well, where people then can see that signal, but also know how to refer to you. And you'll notice there's my Guelph one. I started at St. Jerome's April 6th, 2020. So I have had no need for physical pronouns in the past year because of the working from home shift. But one day I will add a third card there with pronouns. If you've ever been in Day Hall at the University of Guelph, this was my office there, 207. It no longer looks like this because I don't work there, but this was a very visually signifying door of a lot of different kind of inclusivity signals. But on that wheel in the middle where it says I'm in, underneath my name, there's a spot that says pronouns as well. So I someone kind of like my email signature, doors for me are great real estate to advertise things, but if someone's coming to find me and I'm not in my office, the door could also share pronouns as well. Web bios are another great place to put them, since, as instructors, we have our web bios that our students can find, that, folks outside the university can find. So putting pronouns there. I like to say, we all have offices, we all have email addresses, we all have extensions, we all have titles. We also all have pronouns or pronominal systems that could be kind of admin info as well. And then now that I work in outreach and recruitment, there's a lot of outward-facing materials that will have my name on them as well. So this is the back of our admissions brochure, or the view book for St. Jerome's. And so under my name and my title, it also has my pronouns. Again, each of these photos appears on their own slide at the end of the slideshow for future reference and seeing those as well. But those are some ways that we can model our pronouns, how we can get them out there, start normalizing this and inviting other people to do so as well. So I encourage you to share your pronouns or pronominal system, if you're comfortable, in your teaching and learning activities. This, if you're comfortable, is super important because, as I mentioned about myself, I'm not confident enough to say that those 3 series will be my 3 series for the rest of my life. We are all on our own journeys with our own understandings of our identities. And so someone might not be comfortable sharing a pronoun because maybe they're working through in their own self which pronoun series would be the one for them. So maybe they're not in a place where they're ready to share, or maybe it's not a safe space to share. Often I've been one of the only people in group spaces who have shared my pronouns. And when I share, my pronouns are he, she, and they. That can give a lot of information about me away, but it also can invite people to make a lot of assumptions about me. And so maybe there's a space that I could be in where I don't feel comfortable. It's not a safe space for me to share my pronouns for that. So thinking about this never being mandatory to share your pronouns or to have your students or in group spaces share them. And we'll talk about this more in a moment as well. But you, as an instructor or a presenter, you could include them by your name on the introductory slides, say them out loud when introducing yourself. Pronoun buttons and badges in the physical world are also a great way to have them. You could write them on, if you're at a conference, you could write them on the name card around your lanyard as well, but getting them there visually. In the digital world, pronoun suffixes like on Zoom or Bitmojis can be great. Email signatures, business cards, and more. There are so many ways we can model using pronouns and pronominal systems to begin, as I said, normalizing this work, but also getting comfortable in ourselves with sharing them as part of those pieces. One note, use the singular they as a default for others. Subnote on the note, this is not perfect. So as we talked about, not everybody will identify with the series, with the singular they to be referred to. So if you're thinking about, you don't know who someone is and you're teaching in a big classroom, rather than assume a binary pronoun based on the way that person visually presents, say they. It might not be their pronoun, but it's more inclusive than guessing or assuming a binary pronoun, and it's a powerful signal to use the they. You still might be wrong. I want to underscore here. You still could be wrong by looking at someone and not assuming binary pronouns, but using a they. However, it's more inclusive than assuming a binary pronoun. And all of this, again, comes back to intentionality and transparency. There is a question here, and Danielle, I'm going to see if you can do this for me. The question is, would you please share the link in the pronouns in your email signature? Thank you. And absolutely. Danielle, I'm going to ask you to open up the most recent email from me, open the link, and please drop that in the Q&A for folks.
Sounds good. I'll get to that.
Thank you, Danielle. There's also another question that says, are there certain situations where you prefer people use specific pronouns when speaking about you, or can all three pronoun series be used interchangeably? In general, when a person says they identify with more than one gender pronoun, should they be split 50-50? This is a great question. For me, to answer that specifically, since it is asking about me, the only circumstance in which I do hope people would use a specific pronoun is when I'm in drag. I feel empowered, I feel seen, I feel fabulous and special when I'm in drag and someone refers to me as she. It feels validating, it feels affirming, it feels, as I said, fabulous and fierce. I joke, if I'm going to spend 3 hours getting ready in that body, you should refer to me with the she series of pronouns. However, if someone referred to me with the he series or the they series when I'm in drag, that wouldn't be wrong. So for me, any of the pronoun series can be used interchangeably. Increasingly, I'm noticing, and this is the first time I'm sharing this out loud, increasingly I'm noticing people are defaulting to the they when they speak about me in the third person. And my guess is they're doing that because they're aware if they choose the he or the she, they're choosing a binary pronoun in that instance, whereas the they could use to be more inclusive of who I am as a whole person. However, and Rudiger, I'm going to put you on the spot, Rudiger also didn't use a pronoun when introducing me today as well. So Rudiger just continued to use my name in each instance of that, which again is a great way to not make a mistake and to not pick which one you're using. But if Rudiger were to have said, he's still working on his PhD, other than reminding me that I'm still working on my PhD, that would have been a great safe thing to say because that is one of my lived pronouns as well. So for me, they can be used interchangeably, but I'm noticing people are defaulting to a they when speaking about me, but all of them are right. The caveat here, of course, is with respect. If somebody is using any of those series to refer to me in a belittling way, in a bullying way, in a mocking way, that's no longer okay or acceptable. To the second part of the question, when a person says they identify with more than one gender pronoun, should they be split 50-50? This is a great place to, exactly as the question asker did, ask. So if someone says, hi, I'm so-and-so, and my pronouns are he, they, if they don't say you can use either to refer to me respectfully, you could ask and say, thank you for sharing your pronouns. Is there a series that you would like me to use over the other? And then they may say to you, nope, both are fine. Or they may feel comfortable sharing and saying, actually, I'd like you to use the they. I'm working on having that become my pronoun series, but for now, both of them are accurate to who I am. So ask. Again, ask if you can ask in that sense for it. Don't assume. Great questions. So intentionality and transparency. Thinking about how we're doing this, why we're doing this, and so importantly for us as teachers, telling our students why and how we're doing this. So it's not just at the beginning of class sharing your pronouns and then thinking everybody in the room is going to get it and think, great, my prof sharing their pronouns. Explain why you're sharing your pronouns. Have a little bit of a teaching moment going through that as well with them. So intentionality and transparency is really huge. This gets us then to that idea of the culture of respect that we're cultivating, and it happens through pronoun awareness. So Spade says, use pronoun awareness as a way to signal a culture of respect. If we explain this to folks really clearly, it will do the job we want it to do and make the group spaces easier for people to participate in and build skills in each of us to make less assumptions about each other. So again, if we explain it really clearly, there is an onus on those of us as teachers to do this really clearly explaining, because it's not something that is so much a part of academic or even wider culture that we can safely think everybody understands what we mean when we even say pronoun. So if we can explain this really clearly, it'll do the job we want it to do, which is, as Spade says, make group spaces easier for people to participate in. This might sound wonky, however, I do feel uncomfortable when people don't share their pronouns because I'm not going to default to a binary pronoun based on how someone looks. So I will use a they for that person because they haven't shared their pronouns, but I'm also aware that they could be a wrong pronoun for that person. So even as somebody who uses 3 series and shares my pronouns, when other folks don't share their pronouns, that can make the space less easy for me to participate in. I'm still working, though, on not making an assumption that they're not sharing their pronouns because they don't know or don't want to. They may not be sharing their pronouns because of any number of reasons that group space is not a safe space for them. They also may not be sharing their pronouns, as I'm recently learning, because they were asked to share pronouns. And maybe they don't use pronouns, they use their name. And so I'm figuring out how to, in my introduction activities, shift it from pronouns to pronominal system. And again, going back to transparency and modeling, that little note on my slide defining pronominal, I've been using so that I'm able to say pronominal means this. Here's why we might do this. And then I get to spend a little bit of time with people educating them about why people might not use pronouns and about intersexualized bodies and how we need to be more aware of medical trauma, those kinds of pieces as well. So this is that part Spade's talking about building skills in each of us, and then making fewer assumptions about each other as well. I want to share this quotation from Jack Halberstam, who is probably the leading transgender studies theorist. Jack says, I wish more people would behave like my partner's son and simply ask, politely and without judgment, what pronoun an individual prefers. Jack also says, I wish more people would use a pronoun system. There's that term, not quite pronominal system, but pronoun system, based on gender and not on sex, based on comfort rather than biology, based on the presumption that there are many gendered bodies in the world, and male and female do not even begin the hard work of classifying them. So the second part of the quotation is super powerful because it's clocking and breaking so many of those myths and assumptions that we have about defaulting to the binary male and binary female for it. So when I think about my wish as well, I think about wishing that more folks who have a pronominal system that matches the way they visually present. So for example, somebody who looks like a male, quote unquote, and uses he, him, his pronouns, I wish that those people would share their pronouns more often. For me as a queer and trans person in group spaces, when I hear people share binary pronouns that align with the way they visually present in a binary coded way, that is super exciting because that's somebody in the room who I know is probably an ally or an accomplice in this work, somebody who is sharing their pronouns without risk. There's not really risk in saying, in looking like, a white, cisgendered, heterosexual professor with a PhD. There's not much risk in saying, please call me he. There is risk, I should note, there is risk in binary gendered and binary sexed females in certain academic spaces to be identifying as that. Thinking about math and engineering and more of those male-dominated spaces, they may not always be the safest places to lead with your identity in a minority status for that. And not everybody has to be an activist, right? I was kind of born that way, or before I was born, I'm in this body. But thinking about those presumptions that we have about gendered bodies in the world and how we can bust them. Pronouns are showing up in popular and public cultures too. So at one of Gaga's concerts 2 years ago at the Apollo Theater, before Gaga set up her song Million Reasons, she said publicly to the sold out concert, "I wish to share this with anyone who's listening, not just in this theater, but around the world. Ask the question, what is your pronoun? Because for a lot of people, it's really hard and their pronoun is not respected or they're not asked. And for me, I've grown and changed over the years in a lot of different ways. I felt misunderstood in a lot of different ways. All of our hardships are different. I don't mean to compare. I just mean to say we're in this together. And I've had a million reasons to want to give up. But sometimes, if you're lucky, you just need one reason to stick around." And when I heard this, I wasn't in the concert hall, but I wish I was because I probably would have fainted. But when I heard this, and then I found the articles and the clips and stuff about it, when I heard this, my first thought as an educator, as an activist was, here's Lady Gaga literally saying, and she's a queer icon, she's a trans icon, she's a drag king, she's bisexual, she's someone who also has multiple letters in the Alphabet Mafia slogan LGBTQIA2S+ going on in who she is. And here's her actually picking up on what Spade was saying before about that anxiety, depression, and suicidality. Here's Gaga saying, you just need one reason to stick around. And that could be a prof or an instructor or peers in your class asking your pronoun or sharing their pronoun. So we're seeing this shift in popular and public cultures as well, which is incredible. There also is a huge chunk of TikTok with pronoun videos and people engaging in this conversation. One day I need to add a slide, and that'll probably add an hour to my talk. So I'm not quite ready to do that just yet, but TikTok has been an incredible vehicle for popular public cultures when it comes to gender pronoun awareness, and cultures of respect as well. But I want to wrap up with this note about care and doubling the care, because we need to be caring, but we also need to be careful. So two types of care here. And in the academy, those of us who are educators, those of us who are in these positions of authority, we have a duty of care to our students as well. So I want to double down on that. But be caring and be careful. And I want to remind us not just about that medicalization of intersex bodies that I talked about, but also the historical medicalization of queer bodies and of trans bodies. So we know that trans bodies can, but don't have to, go through surgeries and through Western medicine as well for their confirmation and their affirmation through hormone replacement therapies, through different types of plastic surgeries and bodily adjustments as well. So we know there's still medicine involved in trans bodies. But what we might often forget is that queer bodies also were medicalized bodies. They were pathologized bodies. The word homosexual, which has fallen out of favor in our contemporary, showed up in medical discourses as something that was clinically wrong with people and needed to be corrected. So the entire identity, and there's a ton of scholarship written on this, the entire identity of who queer people are started because something was wrong with us mentally, and medicine needed to intervene to fix us. So while intersex bodies are to the minute medicalized bodies because of what happens non-consensually with those surgeries on newly born babies, trans bodies are also still medicalized, and queer bodies have that history. This brings up issues of trauma and re-traumatization that are so important for us to be aware of, because something that seems, and this goes back to intentionality, meaningfulness, and transparency, something that seems inclusive, like, please go around the room and share your name, what you did this summer, and your pronoun, can be incredibly triggering and re-traumatizing for someone like I shared, who had pronouns used as weapons against me, or like someone who's an intersexualized body whose pronouns were forced on them non-consensually through anatomical surgery. So the stakes are very, very high, and we need to be caring and careful. We also need to constantly reflect on whiteness, marginalization, and continued struggle, because we often forget, because of the way, the white heteropatriarchy works in a colonial system, we often forget, as Laverne Cox tells us, that these are not rooted in white bodies. These are rooted in non-white bodies. So Laverne Cox, who actually spoke at the University of Guelph a couple of years ago, asked, where are we as an LGBT community over 45 years after the Stonewall Rebellion? Sylvia Rivera warned us about becoming a movement that was only for white middle-class people. And 45 years later, the most marginalized of our communities are still struggling. It's now 51 years later, and on June 28th, 2021, it's going to be 52 years later. Like I said at the beginning, the difference between a Pride March and a Pride Parade is staggering. When you look at how easy it is for white middle-class gay people to go to Pride and be who they are, it is not as easy for queer of color and trans of color people to do the same thing. And I recently found out that as early as 1971, so 2 years after the Stonewall riot, Sylvia Rivera was booed off the stage for being a Latinx drag queen and trans person, because white people were wanting to celebrate being recognized for being gay. So 2 years after the Stonewall Rebellion, and already white bodies were taking over. So when I talk about being careful, it's huge. And when I talk about being caring, the impact of that care can also be incredibly huge. And this leads us to thinking about things beyond just language. And so I'm going to end on this note around visual symbolism as well, because this is a shot of the flagpole at St. Jerome's University, where I work. And this was taken in June 2020. And this was the first time in St. Jerome's history, and we are a Roman Catholic institution, those are our roots, where we flew any version of the Pride flag. And if you haven't seen this particular flag before, you might notice it looks a little different from the traditional 6-bar rainbow flag. And that's because it includes on the left-hand side arrowheads of a white, pink, and blue arrow, which are the 3 bars of the trans pride flag, and a brown and a black arrow, which are the bars of the BIPOC pride flag. And they're pointing to the right, which is metaphorically the direction of the future. And this flag is called the Progress Pride flag because it came out of recognizing that whiteness and the continued marginalization of folks in the queer and trans community, because the 6-bar pride flag doesn't explicitly recognize queer and trans of color and trans and non-binary folk as well. And so this, and I'm not saying, I want to be careful, I'm not saying the traditional 6-bar pride flag is a bad symbol. I'm saying that there might be ways we can advance our symbolism to become more inclusive and to have, thinking about Adrienne Rich and Toni Morrison, different mirrors that show reflections of different people in our work. So I want to thank you very much. And I want to put this slide up of Sam. This is 3 more Sams, because maybe you're feeling like one of these Sams at this point. Maybe you're feeling like Sam on the left and you're kind of coming up for air and you're like, okay, wow, that was a lot. I'm coming up for air. Maybe you're Sam in the middle, you're alert and still curious about what's going on. Or maybe you're Sam on the far right. Maybe you have your bow tie on, you're dressed and you're just good to go. Either way, I would love to hear from you. So please do continue to drop more questions into the Q&A, and we can keep chatting. But thank you so much for coming out today and for engaging in this talk with me.
So this is the awkward part of this particular medium, I'm afraid, because we can't see each other. There are no cues. I did want to express my thanks to you, Tommy, while questions are being formulated. I expect, and I actually have one for you myself. I did private message you that because I'm not sure how to do it in the public venue. But the one question I have is, the notation for pronouns, the pronouns colon and then the mention of pronouns versus using it in brackets behind names, which I believe you've done with the Zoom one. That's one I'm not sure. Which would be the better notation? That's a very selfish question, but I think it's a bigger question as well.
No, it is a bigger question, and thank you for that, Rudiger. I haven't actually consciously thought of why I do that with the punctuation, but thinking out loud here on your question, when I put my pronouns in parentheses beside my name, it's because it's part of my name in the visual presentation of it. So in my bio, it would be Tommy Mayberry, he, she, they in parentheses, and then is, right? Sort of going onward as part of the grammar for that. In the Zoom thing, it becomes my full name on the screen. So it's in bracket or in parentheses for that. In the email signature, it's kind of like a questionnaire blank, like pronouns colon blank. And then I've put my pronoun. And it is funny because I hadn't thought of this, and I've been thinking about them every time I put up the slide with my Waterloo business card and my Guelph business card. One of them has them in quotation marks, and one of them has them. Actually, what does the other one have? I can skip to that. I'll go back. One of them has them in parentheses and quotation marks, and the other has them bolded, but in a smaller font than my name. And I was just, to be completely honest, at Waterloo. It took about 6 weeks, and it had to go right up to Senate to get this as an optional place on the business cards. I was just happy to have them there. Looking at this now, don't love the quotation marks around it. That makes it look like, like cutesy or like nice to have. I do like the Guelph. The Guelph was super easy because Guelph, it was sort of like, hey, I did this at Waterloo, and Guelph was like, this makes sense, let's do it. So the Guelph ones, it didn't even take a day. It took longer for the cards to show up than it did to get the pronoun box added to the template for that. What I might add to the Guelph one, I think, might be the parentheses back in. I kind of like that, the separation of them as here's my name and here's the pronominal system if you're going to not use my name in referring to me. But now I want to think about this more because now the English nerd in me is coming out with punctuation and power as well. So thank you for that question. It's not a great answer, but it maybe it helps a little bit. Oh, too far. What other questions or even thoughts or comments? They don't have to be formed as a, question specifically. It could just even be I have no idea what I'm asking, but I've often thought about this. part of the awkwardness with this medium too, Rudiger, is we call it a listening only. And so I often sometimes feel when I'm like, all right, let's hear from you. People are like, oh no, I signed up to listen. I didn't sign up to ask. So yeah, I mean, if you have questions or anything after that come up as well, please do email me. My email address is all over the slides as well, so you can find that. But Danielle and Rudiger also have that, so you can definitely email me. Or if you're typing a question, I apologize for interrupting you as well. One question that I often get asked, thinking about it being a listening only workshop, and maybe you're thinking it, I added that asterisk to the outcome slide about other languages than English. And I often get asked, what does this look like in other languages? Since this is very much a English language thing with pronouns and with the binary gender. And it's such a great question because each language does have their own system. Some languages like French have gender built beyond just the pronouns for that, where it's built into the way verbs are conjugated, or into the nouns themselves can be masculine or feminine as well for that. And I recently was actually working with Professor Don Cornelio in the French department at Guelph on some French translation projects. And French is building a kind of punctuation system to become gender neutral, where they're using the mid dot, which is not the period, it's the one that is kind of on the middle of a line. And what they're doing is they're putting together the binary gender into one word. So if you were like professeur, for example, would be le professeur or la professeure with the E on the end of it in French. And so what they would be doing in that sense is they would be putting the professeur and then mid dot and then the E on the end of it, so that the visual way this noun looks includes both of them. French is not my first language, so I don't know what that looks like from a mother tongue kind of sense for that, but you will start to see in some pieces that coming through in them. Rudiger, you once had shared, I think it was German, right, that has multiple genders built multiply throughout a lot as well. So it's a very interesting and important conversation to think through with these as well. But what the French shows is even a language that has it built through the fabric of it can find a way to be more inclusive in the visual communication of it, which is exciting. The other classic example is the Latinx community, who has the binary system built in the O and A suffixes. And what they've done is just replace them with the letter X that you pronounce. So instead of Latino or Latina, it's Latinx. Instead of Chico or Chica for boy or girl, it's Chicex. And so they've just, wonderfully crossed out the gender, and you pronounce that that X in it as well, which is, again, a creative way to overcome those colonial barriers in the language.
So I don't want to dominate this, but I have a microphone, so with the German, the issue I have is, I think, because the feminine is always added to it, right? So it's always the masculine stem first, and you can make it feminine by adding an IN. So then they will capitalize in the middle of the word, but in the end, the stem, the beginning of it, is always going to be the masculine, right? So everything else still seems like an afterthought. So again, I don't know how we're going to fix this, but that is what it is. Also, I mean, there are two attendees, which I appreciate, but there aren't any more questions. So I wonder if I could just do the final thank yous and my sincere gratitude to Tommy for having given this presentation again. And while the attendance wasn't huge, it is simply an indication of where everyone is, courtesy of COVID and the end of semester, I expect. But we will definitely be posting this and making it widely available for the College of Arts and beyond. So again, thank you very much, Tommy, for your time and for your effort. And the sun has just come up, at least here in Guelph. So I hope we all have an opportunity to take advantage of the nicer weather. I know Tommy, I think you suggested you were on dog duty fairly quickly, so maybe a walk is in order.
Yes.
All right. So thank you very much, everyone, and take care. Bye.